I'm joined now by Bloomberg columnist Matthew Lynn. Matthew, pleasure to have you as always. The gist of this probe is that Google, the EU antitrust regulators think that Google's allegedly discriminating against other advertisers and effectively not playing fair. How does that work? How do they know all of this?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think, you can kind of leave it to the lawyers to get into the minutiae of it, but I think that's kind of a bigger issue, which I was talking about in the piece, which is really about, does the EU really have the right idea of what constitutes a monopoly?
I liked what you said. I mean, is it a monopoly or is it just a really, really successful company?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's an interesting question, because on the surface, I mean, Google has a 90% market share in search in Europe and in most of the world, so you think, OK, that's a monopoly. And if it was a cement manufacturer in Bristol, who had a 90% market share, we'd think there was something pretty murky going on behind the scenes and a bit arm twisting and bullying that was, there was bad stuff that had to be stopped. But in the digital economy, it's really quite different. And companies have, the one thing we've learned over the last sort of 4 decades, companies have these monopolies very, very quickly. They rise very quickly. They have huge market shares, but they don't last very long.
So, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? That this antitrust legislation, which has been in place really since the beginning of the EU, might not work particularly well with a lot of these new digital companies, because we see, as you say, we've seen, you use some examples in your piece about IBM, Microsoft. Google isn't the first sort of tech company to rise to preeminence, effectively, and have a huge share.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because, I mean, they had a go at Microsoft, and, 10 years ago, Microsoft that looked like a monopoly. It doesn't really look nearly so powerful now. IBM, before Microsoft, looked all-powerful, was all-powerful, then Microsoft came along and whacked it over the head and put it in the ditch. Google looks all-powerful now, but, you wouldn't really want to bet on Facebook not coming ahead of it, in a few years' time. So I think these things are very, very unstable, because, people cluster around one technology. We all went on Microsoft because everyone else used Microsoft. Yes. We all go on Facebook. That's where our friends are. Who wants to be on some funny little social networking site where you're all alone? That's not really the point.
So it doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that they're doing something bad behind the scenes, that they're bullying or abusing their position. And I think, the EU's people need to get a little bit more into the 21st century.
No, there does seem to be a hint in your piece that this could be perceived anyway as being slightly anti-American. Why is that?
Well, you can't help noticing that they're all American companies, aren't they? I mean, it's fairly obvious. And that's because, if you look at it, the United States in the last 2 decades has been tremendously good at producing these big, high-tech, innovative companies. And Europe's been very, very bad. I mean, Nokia is the only real example of a globally successful technology company.
So is this a case of the EU trying to level a playing field when they should just allow the main players to take over?
You can't help feeling that there's a suspicion of that. And it's if you put the two things together, it certainly looks quite bad. If you look at the misunderstanding of what a monopoly is and the fact they keep attacking American companies, I think you have to understand it's going to cause some ill feeling over on the other side of the Atlantic. We wouldn't like it if they always had a go at our car manufacturers, or they always had a go at our fashion houses, or all the things that Europe is
lay off EU. So
yeah,
OK, thank you very much indeed.